This boozy little cocktail is actually surprisingly well balanced. Let me show you how to make a Hearn. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week I'm making a boozy little number that is still very balanced. I'm making a Hearn. Now, this cocktail actually comes from the Dead Rabbit, one of those legendary cocktail bars in New York, and it's a very nice kind of cocktail. It's sort of similar to like a Tipperary, that kind of classic Irish whiskey, vermouth and chartreuse cocktail, but it leans into the kind of herbal botanical notes a little bit more while still being very balanced. The recipe calls for some Irish whiskey, some blended Irish whiskey, and I've got here the Uais Whiskey from the Ahascragh Distillery. Very nice little whiskey. I'll put a link down below to my review. I'll also put a link up above because I reviewed that a little while ago, but very nice little whiskey. Quite sweet with a lot of flavour behind it because it's 50% grain whiskey, 25% malt whiskey and 25% pot still whiskey, so it's actually got a lot of flavour to kind of balance out a lot of those sweet notes you'll get from grain whiskey. It does come in at 43% ABV, so it's got a nice little bit more weight than a lot of like the standard blended Irish whiskies you'll find. But if you can't find this one here, the recipe just calls for blended Irish whiskey. It also calls for some red vermouth. I've got this here, some sweet red vermouth. I've got the Martini Rosso red vermouth. I just like it. It's nice, it's sweet. For me, it's a nice balance of that kind of botanical note and those sweet notes. But again, if you've got your own favorite vermouth, you can use that. More botanical notes coming though with this here. This is green chartreuse. This is a very nice liqueur. It is coming in at 55% alcohol by volume, so it's quite boozy. It's quite herbal, quite sweet. It's really hard to kind of mimic the flavor of chartreuse, unfortunately, because the chartreuse and monks, the guys who make it, they kind of scale back their production now. So it's getting harder and harder to find bottles, especially the large size bottles. More and more you see those small bottles like this on the shelves, but very nice liqueur, very full flavored and just kind of quite botanical. The recipe also calls for some absinthe. Now I've got just some absinthe here. This is from the Rebel City Distillery here in Cork, but only calls for a couple of dashes of it. So I've just put some of my absinthe into an old dasher bottle just so I can add a little bit. Very little handy tip: if you ever have a dasher bottle that you runs out of dashers, you can just wash it out and save it. And if you ever need to add dashes of chartreuse or dashes of absinthe, you've got something there. You don't need to go out and buy it. Next up, it also calls for some orange bitters, and it actually calls for some Orinoco Bitters from the Dead Rabbit. Now, these are not Orinoco Bitters. This is the Angostura Bitters, because I've looked and I cannot find the Orinoco Bitters anywhere near me. Nowhere seems to sell them, at least nowhere near me seems to sell them, seems to ever stock them or have them in stock. But I did a little bit of digging online, and while the recipe calls for 4 dashes of Orinoco Bitters, Angostura Bitters, they're a little bit more bitter, a little bit more herbal, and they've got similar flavour profiles. So apparently if you use 3 dashes of Angostura Bitters, that'll get you to the right ballpark. It still won't be exactly right, but it's in the right ballpark. And that's enough talking about the cocktail. It's time we make it. It is a stirred drink, so we're going to get our mixing glass and we're going to pop a nice rock of ice in there before we measure out the rest of our ingredients. Starting off with our Irish whiskey, we're going to go in with 45ml or an ounce and a half of our Irish whiskey. Like I said, this is going to be a kind of a boozy cocktail. It's still going to be quite balanced, but every single ingredient we're adding is going to be alcoholic. It's going to have some amount of alcohol in it, so just be careful when you're making this. It is going to be quite a boozy forward cocktail. So that was 45ml of our whiskey, and we're going to go in with the same amount of our red vermouth, of our sweet vermouth, 45ml or an ounce and a half of our red vermouth. This is going to give us a lot more sweetness than in the classic Tipperary, which is going to help balance out all those extra kind of botanical and herbal notes we'll be getting from the rest of the ingredients. Speaking of which, our green chartreuse. We're only going to go in with 15ml or half an ounce of our green chartreuse, because like I said, this is quite alcoholic, this is quite boozy, and this is very full flavored. So it is actually quite easy to overpower a cocktail with your green vermouth if you go in with too much of it. So just in like that, 15ml. Then we're going to go in with our absinthe. Just 2 dashes of absinthe will give us a lot of extra flavor. It's got this kind of anise flavor. It's got this kind of sweet, but just, a kind of anise flavor, almost like licorice. Will give us a lot of nice flavor though in the end and just complement the other ingredients. Next up, it's our orange bitters. We're going to go in with 1, 2, 3 dashes of orange bitters into there. And then lastly, we're going to go in with our Angostura bitters, or if you can get them, you can use the Orinoco bitters from the Dead Rabbit. Like I said, just 1, 2, 3 dashes of our Angostura bitters into there, and I'm going to stir it for about 30 seconds, 35 seconds, just until we get it nice and cold. Okay, I think that is nicely chilled now. It's got a really nice balance of flavours, but we're not just going to drink it out of the mixing glass. We're going to pour it into a nice chilled Nick and Nora glass, pop our strainer up top, and just pour it away, nice and simple. In that chilled Nick and Nora glass is going to keep it nice and cold a little bit longer and just keep the cocktail at the right balance of flavours. For a final little touch, a little garnish, we're just going to get a little orange zest, express the oils, pop it over the edge just like that. And that right there is how I make a Hearn cocktail. Now real quick before I taste this cocktail, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews every Wednesday, like the review of that Uais Whiskey, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday, so if you want to see those, make sure you're subscribed. But right now, let's taste this cocktail. That is a really nice kind of balance of flavour. So immediately up front, as you're lifting it up, you get this hit of botanicals, you get the hit of the chartreuse, the vermouth, all those bitters in there, the little bit of the anise licorice flavour you get from the absinthe coming in there, but also it's just got this really nice sweetness behind it, really nice depth of sweetness coming through to help balance out all that kind of herbal botanical notes you're going to get from the cocktail. Because we went in with that 45 ml of the sweet red vermouth, it does help balance out against all those other ingredients. Like, this is quite, as I said, every ingredient we used is alcoholic, but it's actually surprisingly balanced. You don't really taste the booziness. It doesn't feel in your cheeks like it's a really boozy cocktail. Just a very nice, easy to enjoy. If I was going to place this as a kind of cocktail to drink, I'd say definitely like an after dinner drink. Definitely like a bit of a slow sipper. Having it in that chill glass I think is important, because you wouldn't want to serve this I think on the rocks, because then it'll dilute down and you'll lose some of those botanical kind of herbal flavors. But like this, nice sipper, really nice to enjoy, so I'm going to keep on enjoying it, and I will see you next time. Sláinte.